Hello and welcome to another episode of Football Today. Yeah, we're back 1 week after our last episode. We thought we'd, come back with a little two-parter here, talking about managerial changes this summer in the Premier League. Last week we covered Everton and Crystal Palace, and this week we're looking at Wolves and Tottenham. Dave, are you excited to talk about two of the other big changes in the Premier League this summer?
Well, I think the fans of those clubs should be, because last week we did Everton and Crystal Palace, and we basically predicted the future. Crystal Palace have gone on and signed multiple young players since then, and Everton have acted like a tire fire of a club.
Yeah, so I love it. They're staying true to their brand.
Right. So we were fairly correct on both of them. So I think Tottenham and Wolves fans should be excited because they don't have to wait. They'll now know the future of their club by just listening to this episode.
I know. It's fantastic. We're doing a public service, really. Well, let's just jump right in. We're going to start with Wolves first, actually, not Tottenham, even though they are the quote-unquote bigger team. Dave,
because they're in the Europa Conference.
Yeah, I mean, huge cup, huge silverware on the line this year. Yeah. They could be the first-time winners. I'll be honest. I was a little taken aback or surprised when Espirito Santo left Wolves. Back in I think it was June or May. Maybe it was the end of May. That being said, didn't have a great season. Apparently, they were looking at firing him all the way back in like February. What were your kind of reactions to him leaving the club this summer when he did? And then we'll talk about Bruno Lage or Lage.
So I had two thought processes. My personal thought process was that we're in a space where every club always wants something bigger and better, even though it may not exist. And so I wasn't super surprised that they separated. And while we know that Nuno stepped down, it felt like it was a pretty well organized thing throughout the club. And as you said, the rumors about them earlier. And then in getting ready to do research for this episode and in studying a lot about the ownership group and the way they've operated themselves, I was actually completely not surprised that it happened, because this is an ownership group that, since they've come in, have tried to push people. And when you look at just the club, they've hired over 150 staff members that didn't exist before to make the club larger. And then they've cycled out a lot of people who have been with Wolves basically forever. And so it's an ownership group that's constantly trying to push for more, make people uncomfortable, make people work harder, make the club a little bit bigger. And I think when you look at how things went last year, obviously injuries were a massive part of what happened, but sometimes you do need a reset. And sometimes you need a change of culture and a change of voice. I think it's really hard to be a high-level manager for a long time, same as it feels like it's hard to keep a squad together for a long time. The little pushes you get from working with someone new, from having a new piece in the team, whatever it is, it just seems a necessary part of continuing a football team's progress forward in the way the game's set up nowadays.
Yeah, and 4 years is like a good chunk of time, to be a manager at any club. I mean, that's one Olympic cycle and in a non-COVID time. So I completely agree. And, I think it's also a good sign of a club that, like, you could, in theory, have like a friendly separation. He wasn't fired technically. Right. I think, we're going to talk about Tottenham in a little bit. And just like last week when we did Everton and Palace, we have kind of contrasting organizations, or clubs in this regard, and just how they operate. You have a club that's in Wolves that seemed like a stable, well thought out club. I mean, they made their hire, pretty quickly after he left. It was clear that they had a pretty good idea of who they wanted. And, we'll get into him right now, Bruno Lage. He's not a well-known guy. He's not like a super famous guy. I mean, he's well-known in, Portuguese football circles, sure. But like, to the greater football world, not really. And, they just quickly snapped him up. And I guarantee you, people that are listening to this did not read too many, 1,000 or 2,000 word pieces on the coaching search at Wolves. I guarantee you, whoever's listening probably saw at least one or two Tottenham ones. And that kind of tells the story of the two different clubs, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. There's a lot of parts about Wolves. The main thing is you have to speak Portuguese, I think, to be the coach of their team.
Yeah.
And so that kind of narrows in their coaching search. It makes it a little bit easier. And obviously they're a step down from what Tottenham believes they are and what Tottenham is right now. And so it's a little bit different of a search. You're not in this crazy Antonio Conte, Gattuso circle of the world, which I think is a little bit harder to operate in. But I agree with you that they were decisive in what they wanted to do. And they identified some clear facets that they needed the next coach to have. And it was ability to develop young players and give them opportunities. It was to push the club, I think, forward a little bit, especially in the style that they played, more attacking, pressing a little bit higher. And then the third one is obviously to be able to operate with these Portuguese players that are just going to continue to come in. So you're not steering away from that. And they've steered back into it in this offseason, but it all looks like it should fit together pretty well, Josh. Like I think even if you didn't make any moves, there would be promise for Wolves fans coming into this season because of the injuries you had last year and, you know, the expectation that most of those players will return. But then I think you add a Trincao, you bring in a manager who has stated and shown early on that he wants to play a more progressive brand of the game. And I think you have to believe that a lot of the fans are excited.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really comes down to what do they expect from him. You know, we talked a lot about expectations last week, and I said, you know, if the expectations aren't to make Champions League this year, you know, Everton fans might be, you know, relatively pleased, but it's all about expectations. So if they expect to go right back up to 7th or 8th in the league next year, you know, with this new managerial change, I don't know if they should expect that. That being said, I share your optimism. You know, there's a whole host of young players that I'm about to read in a second who are under the age of 21. And it just, you know, maybe even before we get there, we should kind of look at his background. You know, who is Bruno Lage? I mean, like, essentially, and I'm butchering his Portuguese name. My sincerest apologies. But like, if we look at his track record, you're thinking, okay, wait, who is this guy? I've never heard of him before. That's okay, because he's been nondescript, because this is his only second time being the first team senior coach at any club. Most of his time has been a youth manager. So just a little like quick track record. Became youth coach at the age of 21. So he's pretty much exclusively been a coach. No playing career. Never even was a professional player at all. Like, just immediately got into coaching. I mean, he thought he was going to be a phys ed teacher. Like, he was like, for 5 years, 6 years, he was just at the depths of Portuguese football, not even with like, you know, third division clubs. I mean, we're talking about not even professional clubs, just grinding away. So he's a real humble guy. I mean, and then kind of gets his break, ends up with a third division team for a few years. And then his real big break is at Benfica's academy in 2004. And then he's there for 8 years. And that's kind of where his reputation builds, and he meets a lot of guys, and ends up going to the UAE, and then becoming an assistant to Carlos Carvalhal at Sheffield Wednesday and Swansea, and then goes back to Benfica in 2018 and wins the league with them. He kind of came in as a caretaker manager, won the league, and then the next year finished second and was pretty much fired from the club. But that's kind of a very quick rundown of his CV. Let's go back briefly. But, actually jump in, Dave.
I think some of the things you said, though, are key. Obviously, his time as in youth development is key to what Wolves have been looking for. Benfica are the cream of the crop when it comes to youth development in the world. And then jumping on with Carlos Carvalhal, he went to the Middle East for a little bit, but you mentioned assistant for 3 years in England at Sheffield Wednesday and Swansea City. So you have something that a lot of these young Portuguese managers don't have, which is an experience in England, the ability to understand the culture there as well as the language. Although what's interesting is he still hasn't done a single media appearance, which No one has really touted as it's a problem. It's just kind of odd that it's happened that way so far. But I think you look at him and you say, okay, comfortable working with youth players, has pushed youth players through, has worked at Benfica, both at a youth level, which is elite, and then has won at a first team level and has experience in England. So it checks a lot of boxes for what you're looking for. And I think we talked about this a bit last week when we talked about Everton and Crystal Palace, and what you're looking for is for clubs at this level, if you want to push higher, you need to take a risk. And so I think for a risk, you're getting a decent amount of data points with Lage than maybe some other people who don't know what England's like or have never even managed at a first team level.
Yeah, definitely. And Lage, I think that point about him coaching in England before, he'll be used to the pressure. He'll be used to the media atmosphere. He'll know about, maybe not like all the players in England, but he'll know about the clubs and kind of the relationships and the relationship between the fan base and the manager. And that was something that Nuno really had at Wolves, and he was really good at tapping into. So I think that's really important. And, he can always call up Carlos Carvajal, for some help on that. I mean, I'm sure the two are still close. I want to go back to the young players. We mentioned his time at Benfica and how he was really successful there. I mean, Ruben Dias, Bernardo Silva, João Cancelo, three guys pretty well known to everyone listening. Those guys all kind of came about, with him as a youth guy there. So here are some young guys at Wolves, all under, as I said, the age of 21, and almost all of these besides Trincao, although he's on loan, he's 21, but the rest are under 20 or 20 years old. Gennaro, who they bought from Liverpool last year for decent money. Fabio Silva, who they paid huge money for. Neto, Morgan Gibbs-White, and Aiton Nori, who they purchased finally this year. He was on loan there last year. And then, as I mentioned, Trincao. All those guys, I think, are really promising. And
you wanted to mention Owen Otasoe as well. USA.
Yeah, I just, I wanted you to throw that in.
You skipped that one.
I also like what's going to butcher in the name, so nice. Appreciate that. So what do you think of those young guys? Like, do you think that's like a good group of young guys he can really like develop? I know a lot has been said about Trincao and his time there.
I love Trincao's game. I spent the whole year, and every time I turned on a Barcelona game, I didn't understand why he wasn't getting more opportunities. I thought early on, when they finally had their first little spike of success, he was a huge part of it on that right wing. And then he mainly was a bench player for Koeman after that. And he's aggressive. He likes to take players on. He's confident, but he makes the right decision once he beats guys. And so I think he's going to be extremely successful. Overall, you mentioned all those names. They fielded the most players in the Premier League last year under the age of 21. So it's not just a few notable names. Overall, it was a club philosophy. And I just think, and I think everyone understands this, playing time and opportunity breeds success. Even if there are more talented players in other places, if you give a group of young players an opportunity, and obviously the classic case, go all the way back to Man U and the class of 92 and all those things, you give a group of players an opportunity, some will rise to it and take it at a minimum. And then you look at this Wolves team and you look at the spend on Fabio Silva, which is a club record. So it has to work for them. And the expectation is it will work. And so I think it'll all fit together. You're looking at a couple successful players already. You're looking at players in a ton of different positions. So you can have young players consistently playing, even if Raul Jimenez comes back and maybe Fabio Silva doesn't get starts. You still have young players in central midfield, out on the wing, at fullback. And so I think you should expect a lot of these players to develop. And obviously that ends with being ready to be sold on afterwards. But I think there's a lot of promise. There's a lot of excitement in those young players.
Yeah. And crucially, a different style of play. Young guys might actually work well with this high pressure kind of style play that Lage wants to kind of introduce and that he played at Benfica. I mean, obviously it's only been, I think they've only had one preseason game so far, but when you read the match report, a lot of high pressure, a lot of recoveries up the pitch. And it seems like they're also potentially going to play Silva and start him and have two up top,
Mm-hmm.
which will be different from years past. And I'm a big fan of Daniel Podence. I think he's got really quick feet. I'm also such a sucker for like really short players. Like
Yeah,
he's like
for sure.
5'6" or something.
The Matthew Valbuena build.
Exactly. Yeah. And he's only 24, and I think, he's still got a lot of good football in him as well. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see. I mean, I am really curious what's going to happen with Adama Traore as a result, because I still think he's like a beast. And
he was, I think I saw somewhere last year, unexpected goals. He should have had like 4 goals and 7 assists.
Yeah.
So that shows you. So this team was the 5th lowest scoring team in the league last year, and that even outperformed their XG, which was 4th worst. So basically, they were only better than the teams that got relegated in terms of attack under Nuno Espirito Santo, and that all of that is what has to change now. Even if there was a level of success with that last year, obviously Raul Jimenez, who had 17 goals 2 years ago, gets the head injury. He finished as second leading scorer on this team with 4 goals and played like a quarter of the season. And so I agree with you that you look at pieces that maybe people have already given up on, like Traore. I think Nelson Semedo goes on this list as well.
Yeah, and he's apparently really tight with him. He's apparently really tight. It goes back to his days at Benfica with Nelson Semedo. So apparently they're quite close, and that's huge. I mean, Semedo's a really good player. They're like, if they just turn into like Barcelona cast-off team, that's pretty good. I mean, like, and
right now that's basically being Barcelona minus Messi is the cast-off team.
That's Sergio Roberto there. I mean, I know they're looking at, it looks like Raul Neves might be leaving. I mean, there's been some rumors. Sorry, not Raul. Ruben Neves. So that could take a hit, but it's just really promising.
And I think when you look at players like that, for example, Semedo, he struggles defensively. Put him on the front foot. Let him press. Let him be aggressive. Let a player like that dictate the game going forward. And then you don't put them in situations where they are uncomfortable, right? You play most of the game in a different way than what's been happening to him over the last year and a half with Portugal and with Wolves. So there is a ton of promise in fixing a lot of these pieces that are already there. I think there's excitement with the pieces that have come in. You mentioned Neves. Obviously, at some point with teams at this level, you have to sell to reinvest. And he is the biggest asset that they have right now, but they do have pieces to cover. And so I think it wouldn't, as you said, completely crater the season. So there's a lot of hope. Some of that rides on Raul Jimenez's health. He was obviously an elite player for them 2 years ago when they finished so high, went to a Europa League, what was it, quarterfinal, semifinal?
Yeah, I think quarterfinal. It might have been.
Yeah. Obviously a historic season for this club, and he was a huge part of that. But I think even without him, there's a level of understanding now that this group can be put together to create goals, to create more chances, not just completely reliant on Jimenez on his own.
All right, there are 2 more things I want to address before we move to Tottenham. And the first is Dave. So the obvious con, that we haven't really addressed too much is this is his only second time as a head coach for a team. His first time, he was a caretaker for the first season of it. Granted, he won the league, so I mean, I'm not trying to dock points, but like he was a caretaker, and then he went 1 year and then was bounced. Does that concern you? Should that concern you?
No, I don't think so. I think it's volatile at Benfica. It's volatile in Portugal right now at club setups. And so I think it's understandable that things happen without you being an abject failure. And as you said, he won trophies as well. And I think the other thing about him is this is his expertise. And right now we're in a weird in-between place where you've got the Nagelsmans of the world, but then you've got the Pirlos and Gattusos of some guys are training themselves to be coaches at the elite level, and others are elite players who are just kind of stumbling into coaching. And I would place a gamble on the people who have worked their whole lives to be an expert in this thing that you are hiring them to do. And so I would trust even a young coach, even a coach like this, who doesn't have a ton of first level management experience, that he's spent his whole life working towards this moment, watching other managers. How do you manage a locker room? What are your training sessions like? How do you build out your methodology overall? That I would trust that risk over pulling in the next Frank Lampard.
I love how you said that, because you kind of read my mind of what I wanted to discuss next. But just before I get there, like I do think I'm not worried either, because I think the expectations and the belief is that, okay, as long as we get 13th, 14th or so, that's an okay season as long as we develop these guys. And I think they will do that. They have too much talent. I just think they have a lot of talent on that team, and I would be shocked if they didn't. So Dave, it does seem like we are seeing more, and this just might be like perception and not reality, but it does seem like we're seeing more of these guys that don't come from a playing background, that are having success and getting more opportunities. And that it's not just all going to ex players. You mentioned Nagelsmann, Graham Potter. He was one of the other guys not up for this job, but up for the Tottenham job. And it seems like those guys are getting more kind of opportunities. And I know that when I interviewed Michael Beale a few months ago for my other podcast, The Training Ground Guru, this was something that he mentioned, that a lot of guys, and especially guys that I won't even say just ex-players, but guys who coached youth players. That was actually kind of his point. And I agree that a lot of youth coaches are getting more opportunities now, because players appreciate that process of how youth players or youth development coaches give them, abilities to grow and develop. And that's what players really want. And they're included in the process. And I do think we will see, especially more youth coaches kind of rise up. And we see it with Norwich's coach, Daniel Farke. He was a youth coach, and Tuchel. That's how he got his start as well. And Pep famously. And it just seems like more of the future. So I think actually I want to preface it not with people who weren't players, but especially ex-players who start in youth.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you. I see it a little different. I think everyone should have experience before they get into the job. And the only place to get it is at the youth level, because otherwise you are taking over a first team job, whatever level of the pyramid it's at, completely unqualified. Now, yes, if Zidane wants to manage Crawley Town, he probably has the credentials to do that. But for the learning process of being the best manager you can be, I think you need to start lower down. I think we end up in a dangerous place sometimes where we say, oh, this coach worked with youth players, so he'll value young players, which I don't think is totally always true, because sometimes that's just a means to the end for them. They just want coaching experience, and they need to get their licenses, and they need a team to work with. And then they move up the table or move up the ladder. And there are other managers or coaches who their expertise is the youth space. And you know this better than me from the Training Ground Guru, of these people, that's their life and that's what they do. So I agree that I think we're better off because more managers have some experience as they come into first team management rather than coming off the playing field. I don't know that it always means they value or understand how to coach like a youth coach, or even bring that into their first team coaching. But I think it's super interesting. And the part about managers with not strong playing backgrounds being managers, that is definitely new. And that comes, I think, from one, Mourinho gets a level of credit for it, but this idea that you can have gravitas because you're great at what you do without having been great as a player. And I think that was the line that people were worried to cross was, well, would a great player listen to someone like this? Would Lewandowski listen to a Nagelsmann if Nagelsmann had never been there himself? But Nagelsmann can come in and say, I'm the youngest manager to manage in a Champions League semifinal. I've done all these things. And if you carry yourself with that level of gravitas on top of your footballing expertise, I think that's what makes them a successful manager in these situations.
Those are all really good great points, Dave. All I'm just going to say is the only thing I took from that is that I'm seeing Zidane at Crawley Town next year. I think you've reported something really important, and I'm sure the aggregators are going to get out there and report that.
They
Just
probably
remember to
allow
credit.
headbutts more often around that club, so it probably fits pretty well for him.
On that note, I think this is a good time to talk about Tottenham and their epic journey to find a coach. I believe Peter Jackson shot 3 movies about their journey. Really can't wait till that hits theaters.
Could have been 1, but split it into 3.
So Dave, they had, I'm just going to read some of the names so there's a great piece in The Athletic by Jack Bitbrook, who we've had on the pod before.
It's one of the more fun articles I've read recently of just like, and he doesn't write it in a funny way, but as you're about to explain, just the roller coaster and insanity of what this experience has been.
So here are the coaches named in said article, in no particular order: Scott Parker, Eric Ten Hag, Antonio Conte, Graham Potter, Gennaro Gattuso, Paulo Fonseca, Ralph Rangnick, Roberto Martinez. There might actually be more in there. I
Mauricio Pochettino and Hansi Flick are the two.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, those were the 2 obvious ones. Yeah, sorry. Like I mean, it's absurd.
So I think the key points that you have to lock in on is Mourinho gets let go, and then obviously the Super League stuff happens. And so Levy is doesn't have his focus on what's going on with the club and maybe the coaching search as much. And he gets really in love with the idea of Hansi Flick coming in. Eventually Flick takes the Germany job. Okay. Then they really fall in love with Mauricio Pochettino coming back. They're hearing rumors that he's unhappy in Paris, that his family's still in London, that it's Leonardo's show at PSG and he wants more control. And so then they think they have a chance to bring him back, and PSG, which I don't know why this wasn't the thought process at the beginning, says, no, he has a contract. We're PSG. Yeah. Like, we don't need to let him go to you. There's no value in that for us. After that moment, it actually becomes interesting because we did an episode about sporting directors and Tottenham. And Tottenham goes out and gets ahead of football and Fabio Patrici from Juventus because Pochettino, they knew could do both jobs. And once he's no longer the option, then Tottenham finally, after what we talked about, 8 years, they haven't had one.
Yeah.
Daniel Levy wakes up 7-8 weeks ago and decides that he wants one. So Fabio Patrici comes in. Now he's in charge of the coaching search. From that moment on, they basically sign a contract with 3 coaches, and neither of those 3 coaches is currently the manager of Tottenham. That's where it then goes from there.
Pretty epic stuff. I mean, first being Antonio Conte, second being Paulo Fonseca, and third being Gennaro Gattuso. Each with their own reason for not going through. Conte deciding, actually, you know what? No, thank you. I'm probably not going to get the money from the club to go get out who I want, and this club doesn't have the players that are up to the standard. Probably. I mean, we don't know for certain, but that's probably what happened.
And it probably was best for the 2 sides. It feels like that would have ended poorly.
Who knows?
Well, let's start with it's ended poorly for Conte everywhere else, including when he got every player he wanted and won a title.
I mean, they just won a title at Inter. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure the fans are still probably happy with how the whole experience went.
But he said, I don't get the players I want. And then he left right after getting all the players he wanted and winning a title.
I guarantee you, if Tottenham won a title, they could give a shit if he left.
For sure.
But I hear what you're saying. And then, Fonseca, the club backs out at the last minute while they're in negotiations after they've agreed, and all seems well. And then Gennaro Gattuso, there's a whole movement of say no to Gattuso for some of his, homophobic, racist, and sexist comments from the past.
And I actually think that moment's interesting because in us doing our episode about Tottenham, I think the big thing we come back to and we're going to talk about right here is it's a club that's kind of floating right now. It's a club that seemed to know its path and was staying on the rails, even through some really tough moments, being pulled left and right. And now it's a club that's a little bit lost. And so you see after the Super League, after Mourinho, after losing their style, after losing Pochettino, all the things that have happened, I think you see the influence of the fans in that moment with Daniel Levy, because he doesn't really have a clear path of where he wants to go. And right now he's in between trying to please the fans and trying to run the club the way he's always run it.
Yeah. And they essentially vetoed that. And rightfully so, by the way. I'm quite happy about
also,
that.
Gattuso's not a good manager.
I know. It's
I'm sorry. We watched his Napoli teams. They were fine after a little while, but like he's not impressive. Obviously he's an impressive human being in his past, but he's just not an impressive manager. You didn't see young players get better. You didn't see them play the styles they'd played under the 3 previous managers
He's just not a good manager. Like full stop. If you took away his playing career, he would not be someone who's likely for this job.
Right.
I mean, to me, I even want to go before that. The managerial search, you knew for a long time that Jose Mourinho was not going to last long. I mean, the writing was on the wall for months. Like there were numerous points where they could have fired him, or there was, so it's not like they couldn't have began the search, even though it happened technically when they fired him on April 19th. They should have been planning for that, in January, in February. Okay. And the fact that their leading candidate was Hansi Flick, to me, is like absolutely absurd. Like, did they really? And I know they spoke with him, and I just like, I think that was so wishful thinking that they were going to prize away Bayern Munich's Champions League winning coach to come to Tottenham and lead out Eric Dyer. Like, come on, it was never going to happen. Never. That was delusional thinking. But even, to me, the bigger thing is this whole process. It didn't take 72 days. This was 5 months. Like they had the writing on the wall, and they didn't do anything with it. And they mentioned that Steve Hitchen, who is the director of football, who should be making, he wasn't the director of football. He's like the head of football operations or something. Before they hired Fabio Patrici, he was the head of football decision making, essentially. And his leading guy is the guy who I think they should have got in the beginning, and he checked all the boxes. And that was Erik ten Hag. And he checked all the boxes, and apparently he was open and willing and wanting to come. And they were just like, no thanks.
Yeah. And there's never really an explanation as to why. It's just sort of chasing.
It's clearly why. I mean, they don't say it clearly, but they say in it because Daniel Levy didn't want him.
We don't, but that part is never explained.
No, but they said that it was Hitchen wanted him. They say Hitchen wanted him. And who's above Hitchen? I mean, there's only one guy above Hitchen.
Understood. Can you explain to me why Daniel Levy didn't want him?
Oh, no, because Daniel Levy...
That's what I'm saying.
Because he had deluded ideas.
Right. That's what I'm saying. And so then you look at the club and you say, well, one of the keys that Daniel Levy said was we've gotten away from our DNA of being a free-flowing attacking club. We want to go back to that. Erik ten Hag obviously checks that box. He's been to a Champions League semifinal, has led teams against teams with bigger budgets to success. And that's the part with Tottenham that's, I think you're seeing right now, is they've operated a certain way for, what did we come back to, like about 14, 15 years now?
Yeah.
And it's been successful. And I think their stability has been a reason for a lot of their success. They have now reached the ceiling, I think, of what you can do because of that in the environment that the game exists in. Which is, if City can spend numbers like this, if PSG can spend numbers like this, Man U has the following they have around the world. Tottenham, just being consistent and good and smart about what they do, I think have reached the ceiling. And so the question is, do they continue to sell themselves and their fans on, well, actually, we can win the Premier League? Which means then you either have to start spending in an irresponsible way, which is what we've seen clubs do in the past. And sometimes it works for you and sometimes you fall apart, or continue on the way they are, acknowledge that. And when you get moves right and you have a good season, you have a shot at things, but you're not consistently going to be the biggest club. And I don't think that Daniel Levy, and I don't think anyone at the club really understands what the next steps look like. COVID has obviously thrown a decent amount of that up in the air because of the new stadium where they thought they'd get money. But building a stadium and getting more ticket sales doesn't put you at a spending level with Man City. Because Man City's spending and PSG spending, they don't make sense. And they're not rooted in reality. And so you have to figure out what club you can be alongside all that. And I don't think Tottenham has.
Yeah. I mean, they're still struggling for it. And I mean, it's epitomized by at the start of the search, Jack Pitbrook put out a tweet that said, Nuno Espirito Santo is not going to be the Tottenham coach. And, here we are in late July, and he is the coach. I think we should move on to kind of what we think of him. But do you have a final thought on?
No, I think moving into that, most of us has watched his teams play. And I gave the stats in talking about Wolves, but those are his teams. So when you bring them forward, now you're looking at a manager who has had success in the Premier League, but last year had the team that was the 5th lowest scoring team in the league and 4th on expected goals, lowest in the league. And you are coming out of an era of Mourinho, which Nuno Espirito Santo played for Mourinho at Porto. And you're saying you're going to reshift the DNA and change things. And then you are almost going carbon copy. Now, not as a personality, not as how he manages transfers, not how he treats players. That is different. And I think there's promise and sunlight there. But in terms of the comments about your DNA and what you're going to shift, you have almost gone as close to what you had as what you could find.
And yet, I'm not going to say it's terrible. Like, they could have done worse. Even
Agreed.
some of the names I listed before could have been worse. So how do I look at him? I think he'll be fine. I mean, he'll be, and maybe fine is honestly all that they need at this moment. But maybe it's not. Maybe, they're looking for a little bit more. I mean, I guess it comes down to, like, do you think he can change or evolve as a manager? Because this is something he said, that they're gonna play differently than his Wolves team. I don't know if I buy that, but he said that they're gonna play differently. Do you think that that's possible? Do you think a manager can change? Do you think what he played with Wolves was because of maybe slightly inferior talent, and that he was kind of boxed into playing that way? Or do you expect him to change at all?
I think it's completely reasonable to think a manager can change to an extent, or has other footballing ideas that they're not able to use at every club. I think it's also reasonable to say that if it's just a half tweak here or there, or more talent in spots, that it looks a little bit different. But you also look at a manager who took Wolves to 7th in the Premier League, and as we said, Europa League quarterfinal. You take that group, you just drop the Tottenham squad in there, and he's going to be successful, as you said. So do you really want him to? I think is the other question. Like, if he's not managing the way he sees the game and what brought him success in the exact league you've brought him now into, is that going to be successful, even if it's more entertaining or more attacking? And I think that's one of the things that you have to look at and you have to ask. Mourinho came in with these promises of winning trophies and all of that. I don't think Nuno Espirito Santo has that pressure. And then I think if you look at his teams and you just lay Tottenham over it, you've got physical center backs, you've got talented wing backs, you've got solid central midfield. Harry Kane is a huge conversation that we're about to have, because that is the big question mark right now. But if you were to have him plus Son, you have more attacking ability than what Wolves had. So if you look at him and you say, he took that team to 7th, if you played a similar way with this group, you have to think it's better than that, which means you're already pretty much better than last season, and you're pushing into a Champions League spot and potentially even a title race.
Yeah, I think I come back to with him is I think he will. I don't know if he'll hit the potential of all of the players at the club and he'll unlock all the potential, but he will make the club, reach their floor and then some. Like, he's just not going to get I feel like it was a kind of a train wreck with Jose, and they still managed to get actually like 62 points, and pretty close in the end to actually like getting fourth and getting fifth. So I like for me, it's one of my main questions was, can he unlock Dele Alli? He's kind of a forgotten figure. I put up the stats in our notes, like 2017-18, 9 goals, 7 assists, 36 games. 2018-19, 25 games. The next year, 25, 2019-2020, 25 games, 8 goals, 5 assists. Last year, 15 games, 0 goals, 2 assists. Like, if they can get him back to not even like peak 2016-17, if they can get him back to like 9 goals, 7 assists from playing, 33, 34, 35 games, like between him, Son, and Kane, listen, they have the talent. They have the talent. And if he can shore them up at the back, like, I don't see why they can't be, getting 70 points this season. I don't think that's crazy. And by the way, that still might not be enough. I'm not saying it will be enough, but like, I think that he'll have them doing well. I just don't know if he'll have them like necessarily breaking into the Champions League. But I think Spurs should be happy with 70 points in a season. I think they should be.
And especially, and I think this is where the success of this hire falls to me, is just turning the page on the Mourinho era and sort of resetting the club. You mentioned obviously Dele Alli. I think there's other distressed assets at this club that have value that were just outcast because that's how Mourinho operates. That if you can bring them back in and get some level of success from them, you could either sell them down the road. I mean, we're seeing rumors about Bergwijn, about Eric Lamela. I don't know that you're getting a ton of value for those guys right now, but if they have a successful 6 months or a year, then maybe you are further down the road. But yeah, I think we're both sort of in agreement that this probably is a fairly safe pick. It's not inspired. It probably sets Tottenham up to be in an okay place over the next 2-3 years, which I think coming out of COVID with a club that's probably as affected by it as any in the Premier League, or at least any in that top 10 space, is necessary to make sure that they remain healthy and stable.
Yeah, and you avoid any drama. Like, I don't think he's going to bring any drama. He's going to be the loyal soldier, so to speak. I can't think of any controversy they ever had at Wolves.
Did you see that he used to yell less? Apparently,
yeah.
And getting to Wolves, he heard that fans thought he didn't care, and so he started to be more demonstrative on the sideline. Apparently, he's fairly passionate and engaging in the training facility all the time. That he's always a loud voice, and that he was always kind of involved in drills and in players' faces in a positive way. But he wasn't during games at Valencia and in Portugal, and he picked that up because of the perception that was coming off him, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I did read that as well. Although I'm going to be honest, I can't think of too many moments where I noticed his, joie de vivre on the bench.
But they show him and he's standing up yelling.
Yeah, no.
I think when he was at Valencia, they said he would pretty much sit all game.
Yeah. The one other guy that I'll be curious to see how he plays with Espirito Santo, just because I see very striking similarities, is Harry Winks. And that's because I see a lot of similarities between him and João Moutinho. Not calling Harry Winks João Moutinho, people. Relax.
João Moutinho's a genius.
I know. And he's like killing it at the age of like 35 or whatever. I'm just saying, like, they're both really good possession midfielders, who can, in theory, at least in theory, change the tempo of a game. And I'll be curious to see if he can kind of unlock some of Harry Winks, and if nothing else, just make him a valuable player to sell on to a team. And yeah, that's just like a little guy that I honestly kind of forgot about because of Mourinho. And he's like not a Mourinho player at all.
So we talked about a lot of players, but we haven't talked about the big one. Do you think Harry Kane will play this season with Tottenham?
No. I mean, yes, 100% yes. Listen, no one is going to pay that astronomical fee for an often injured forward like him. in my opinion. Daniel Levy is on the record, or I think has been quoted as saying 150 million pounds. No one is paying that, because if you're paying that, you might as well just get Erling Haaland. And Daniel Levy is, let's be honest, he is a stubborn SOB. And when when he says he wants that money, he's going to get that money, or he's not going to get rid of a player. And the other reason I think that they'll keep him is just from a pure club brand perspective. If they sell him, I'm not saying that they're irrelevant, but they're kind of irrelevant. He's their one, world class, even though I hate that term, player. No one else.
I think Son's in there as well.
Yeah, but the Son's not driving any interest. I'm not saying he's not, but like, he's not driving any interest. Like, no one's like, oh, I got to watch Son today. People want to watch Harry Kane. He's a compelling, interesting player. I don't think there's any sort of that relevancy with Son. I love him personally.
I don't know that that's true.
Okay.
I can tell you from someone outside of the UK, Son is one of those players that goes viral for the things he does. And I think also the Amazon series helped of like personalizing him.
That's fine.
But I agree with you that Harry Kane is the brand of Tottenham right now. We should say every quote that has come out of the club, including from Nuno Espirito Santo over the last few days, is Harry Kane is a Tottenham player. He will be a Tottenham player. We are excited to see him. He's not required to come back until August 2nd because of Euros. And Espirito Santo has not spoken to him.
Yeah,
he didn't speak to a single
flag.
player at Euros because he wants to do it in person, which I think is dangerous.
Yeah.
Because you're leaving Kane out there to kind of figure it out on his own for a while. But I think I agree with you that Kane will be there this year. And I think the biggest reason is he won't fight the club to leave. And so I think that you mentioned with Daniel Levy, well, what worked for Modric and Bale was to refuse to come to trainings, to make it a scene and stuff like that. Christian Eriksen didn't do that for a while, and he stayed for a while. And I think Kane, just the way he is, I don't think he'll do that. And so I don't think it'll force the gears turning into a transfer move, unless, as you said, City hits this wild number that they have.
Yeah, and he's an academy product, which is more the reason why he might be a little reticent. To say nothing of the fact that I also believe that if you sell Harry Kane, if you're Daniel Levy, all eyes are on you. Any issues they have, in theory, can be put back to Daniel Levy. Not that they aren't already, but like, you're really putting the bullseye on yourself.
Now, can I say if it was me, I'd sell him?
Oh, 100%. From a purely business and like non-emotional point of view, because I do think there is something as a football club, not football club, just any sports team, that like, you really don't want to sell like your it's like the Derek Jeter of them, you just don't want to sell that guy.
So he'll turn 28 in a week. He's injury prone. And if you are talking, so the report is 150 million euros is what, or pounds is what they want. That's not going to happen. You probably get around 100. That's club changing money anyway. And I think I would take all of that, because there's a high possibility that he gets hurt and misses this whole season or misses the next season.
Actually, the more I think about it, I wouldn't sell him. Not at all. And I'll tell you the reason.
I would. If I was the one running this club, I would sell him now. If I got in that 100 million range, which I think you would, just based off the way the conversations seem to be going publicly. And I would take that and I would reinvest it and I would rebuild out my squad. But I fully understand not. I don't think it's ridiculous that they wouldn't, and I would be surprised if they did sell him.
He's one of those players that comes around once every 20, 30 years. I mean, the last Tottenham player that is on the level of Harry Kane, that is, one of their own, so to speak, is Glenn Hoddle. You just don't get players that come through the academy like that your team, your fans can have a bond with. And in my opinion, you don't sell those guys unless you literally have to. All of the rational arguments make sense, so I'm not going to fight you. But like, as a fan, like, that's what you dream about. That's what you wait for. Is you get a guy like Harry Kane. and so you don't piss that away. But you're right. From a financial point of view, it makes sense. So I just want to wrap this up. We've mentioned four guys: Rafa at Everton, Vieira at Palace, Bruno Lage at Wolves, and now Nuno at Spurs. Who do you think is going to be the most successful? Who do you think is going to be the least?
This is tough. I'm going to say that I think Bruno Lage will be the most successful.
Wow.
And I think that means, one, he will be in the job the longest of all four of them. And I think whenever it's done, the feeling from that fan base will be that they still value him. There's a connection and that he did good things at the club. Whether it's, breaking through what Nuno did, I'm not saying that, but I think you'll understand when fans say, well, we valued that time with him, similar to you talking about Brendan Rodgers last week as a Liverpool fan, right? Like there's that connection that gets made. So I think that will be the most successful. This is tough. There's a lot of potential for non-success in this group of four. I guess I'm going to say Rafa Benitez. And so I think you look at an Everton club that will probably be similar to where they are now in a year or two, and it'll fall at his feet. And then now you're starting to stretch back some time to his last successes.
You're telling me you don't believe in Andros Townsend and Rafa Benitez together?
One of the best crossers in Premier League history, Andros Townsend.
I mean, I'm actually kind of annoyed because I kind of 100% agree with you, and I love disagreeing with you.
But they all have the potential, right? Vieira has a high potential to fall flat this year and not get the opportunity. I think that's the danger with him, is the squad this year isn't that good. They're in danger of getting relegated. They push him out and it hurts the club. And then with Espirito Santo, the potential is that it's the same as last year. And there's no bump and there's no change in environment. And now you're a club that's kind of just rudderless in the water for a fair amount of time.
Okay. Well, I mean, I do think there is like, I don't want to put it like 25% or maybe 25 or 33%, 1/4 or 1/3 chance that like I could see Espirito Santo really working at Tottenham and like, them have like end up getting like 75 points this year or 78. That being said, I don't think it's going to happen, but I could see it. I do agree with both of your picks, though. I do think that. I'm way more confident in saying that I think Rafa will be the most underwhelming of those four. I feel pretty comfortable with that pick, but we'll see. It should be fun. I'm just excited that if we zoom out, that we have two teams in Wolves and Palace that really seem to be like kind of going whole hog into kind of youth development and just like going to play a ton of young guys, and we'll see what happens, because I think that's great for the league. So
yeah. Can I leave you with this one random quote that I found, which I found entertaining?
Go for it.
This was one of the executives at Wolves talking about what they want to be at Wolves. There's a really good piece in The Athletic about the new ownership group that took over in 2016 from China and what they've done. But this was the quote. If you imagine, and this is very different of football, this is very unique. We think of ourselves probably more of the Red Bull model than we do as a traditional football club. If you asked someone 20 years ago what Red Bull were, they would have told you a caffeinated drink that gives you wings. They're now a multi-billion-dollar sports and entertainment business with verticals in motor racing, extreme sports, a record label, and a gaming company. That's our vision. Get ready. Wolves is taking over.
And it's all going to become possible because of Bruno Lage.
Yeah, exactly.
Hell yeah, dude. I thank you for doing that retelling. I love owner talk. We should just have like an entire podcast just on like owner talk, because it's absolutely.
Well, we want to play progressive football. We want to be ambitious. The reason we came here is because obviously the environment is perfect. The stadium's set up perfect, but the fan base, the fans here, the supporters are unbelievable. And now I officially own a team.
I I mean, we're not a book selling company. We're actually a space company. We're going to save humankind. I'm Jeff Bezos. I feel like this is a good moment to kind of stop. Thank you, as always, people, for listening. We'll be back in a few weeks' time. Hope you enjoyed, and as always, Dave, thanks for taking the time. The music for this episode was provided by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about the music in the episode show notes.